sometimes you can make a story seem different by simply changing the focus. We all know the story of the Great Depression in the United States, but what about the Great Depression in other countries around the world? I mean, nations like the United States and Britain were able to manage the Depression and ultimately work through it, but what about in countries like Italy, Germany, Spain, or Japan? To understand the Great Depression, you have to understand World War I and the devastation it caused. Europe was completely unstable, and economically, many of the countries of Europe were in complete collapse. The fighting had caused great physical destruction, and many countries had been forced to borrow money to fight the war. Following the war, those countries had to pay back that money, and that led to economic problems. Great poverty was everywhere, and it led people to accept radical change and the promises of fascist dictators like Adolf Hitler or Benito Mussolini. Fascism was a political system that usually has a very strong central government and a strong military. It also has one other common feature: nationalism. That's this idea that you have strong feelings of loyalty to your country. You can also call it patriotism. It's not necessarily a bad thing. At the time, most people believed a strong government were going to be able to help them through their economic problems. That led to a man called Adolf Hitler taking power in Germany in 1933. He definitely had ideas for how to help his country's economy. He became more and more popular with the German people. Millions of Germans were out of work. He came in, he helped that. He began large construction projects of things like roads and bridges. He quickly gave people a sense of purpose. But we all know how this turned out, don't we? At the same time, Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, felt that he could improve his country's economy if his country industrialized quickly, moved away from being an agricultural country to a mechanized country. He wanted to do this really quickly, and he implemented something called the 5-year plans. And under those plans, his government took control of agricultural and industrial production. His government decided what goods were going to be produced, how much, when, where. Even though Stalin had been in charge since 1924, he always was a little paranoid. So at the same time he's trying to help his country's economy, he's also beginning something known as the Great Purge, or the Great Terror. During that time, thousands of Soviets, maybe even hundreds of thousands, were arrested or executed simply because Stalin thought they were a threat, or imagined they might be a threat. Now let's look at Japan. Japan was actually kind of wealthy after World War I, but it had a limited amount of land and a limited amount of natural resources. It was an island. Eventually it was going to run out of resources. Many Japanese believed that in order to become more powerful, they were going to need more land. The military, thus, was going to be very important in Japan. In the 1930s, Japan's military invaded China in the lookout for more natural resources, more land. One of the standout events of that invasion was something that we would eventually call the Rape of Nanking, where Japanese soldiers killed not only Chinese soldiers, but also Chinese civilians, men, women, children, in a massacre of tens of thousands. Whereas the United States dealt with the Great Depression with economic programs and a strengthened democracy. Countries in Europe, most notably Italy and Germany, faced the Great Depression with fascism. The Soviet Union faced it with rapid industrialization forced on its own people, and if you disagreed, you were executed. Now, Japan faced it by trying to conquer new lands. It's a whole new story, and it would lead to the Second World War.